Hello and welcome to Culture Conversations. I'm Craig Foreman, your guide through the ever-evolving world of organizational culture. Here we engage in real, unscripted conversations with the changemakers actively shaping our workplaces. From innovative strategies to heartfelt insights, each conversation is a step towards making work better for us all. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Culture Conversations. Hey everybody, my guest today is Stephen Wong, who I am so excited to have here, and such an important person to me. Currently, Stephen is the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer at MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, a pretty prominent organization in leading the charge towards legalization and using psychedelics for therapy. Prior to that, he was a consultant, a DEI consultant. But prior to that is when we worked together at Culture Amp, and he was a people scientist, and then it went on to launch Culture Amp's first DEI program, which we called our Equitable Design Initiative. So that's a bit about his background. Personally, we met, like I said, he was a people scientist when I joined, and he really was important to me. He showed me the ropes in many ways and helped me as I thought about how to translate concepts and data into stories and into action and working with clients. And it's really gotten into everything that I do, and I always think back to that. He also was big in my life around how I think about DE&I, and not just thinking about it, but how he pushed me to take action, how to lean in and go from thinking about it to how can it showcase in my work, in my life. And that's always been really, really important to me. And I'll share a funny story. One of my earliest memories with him was we were in the lunch area at Culture Amp. I had just started there, and he was openly talking to me, and there was colleagues around about psychedelics and LSD. And I remember sitting there thinking, is this okay? Are we able to do this? And, you know, as I look back, as I've gotten to know him, of course, and it's one of his best traits, this provocative nature, his openness, his willing to be honest, and just put it all out there. And, you know, at the time I remember thinking this is edgy, but as life went on, he has spoken openly about how his journey, use of psychedelics, has, informed his approach to DE&I, and now he's at MAP. So it's just such a fitting story around Stephen, my first memory, or one of my first memories. So in today's conversation, look, we talk about the importance and path to finding meaningful work, which I think is great for anybody as they're finding their own way in this world. The intersection of DE&I and psychedelics, as I mentioned before, and also the power of authenticity in one's work. All great topics and things that I think are going to be really, really beneficial. And I promise you, engaging, interesting, inspiring, that is his trademark. So I'm forever grateful that Stephen has become part of my world. I've learned so much from him, and I hope that you will too. So thank you, Stephen, for being here on Culture Conversations. How are you doing?
I'm really good. I have the day off today. It's Indigenous Reciprocity Day at my organization. So I've got all the time in the world for you.
You got all the time in the world. What are you doing today?
This, and then I'm going to catch up with an old coworker in Oakland.
Awesome. So for everybody listening, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on backstory, but Stephen and I, can I use that? Yeah, you don't use that name anymore, but I still use it.
You still use it? I mean, in the Culture Amp parlance, please call me Sven.
Culture Amp, we called Stephen Sven. It's probably because there was a lot of Stevens there, but we were both people scientists at Culture Amp. Stephen Sven has a very special spot for me because I think when I was trying to figure out the ropes, you were there helping me out and set me on a really great path. But then you went on to lead our DEI initiatives, and now I'll let you talk a little bit where you are now. But you're a very special person to me in my development and friendship, professional. I love what you're up to. You're always pushing the boundaries, and it's awesome to have you here with us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Craig. Yeah, I spent a little over 5 years at Culture Amp. It was a place where I really just blossomed and grew as a culture advocate and professional. I transitioned the head of DEI role to Aubrey Blanche, who is a rock star. Yeah. It's going to be the F word. Can we swear on this? She's a fucking rock star. And then COVID hit, and I didn't have a headcount assigned to me. So off I went, got kicked out of the nest. But it was probably the best thing that happened to me. That was just a really dark time for everyone. I was living home alone, and in San Francisco, we really locked down. So I was doing a lot of psychedelics at that time, and figured out that I wanted to work in the psychedelic space. I wanted to bring DEI into the psychedelic space. I also wanted to bring psychedelic thinking into the DEI space. And I was hoping that there was a spot for me. And yeah, I've spent 2 years working at the intersection of DEI, social justice, and psychedelics. And I'm the director of social justice at MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. I still think a lot about culture, company culture, psychedelic culture. It's, I don't like to use the word dream job because we shouldn't be dreaming about labor, but we do have to work. And as far as finding work that is meaningful and purposeful, I'm very grateful and blessed that I found.
What you just said, I always think about, like, at a certain level, it's kind of what I don't know why it feels like it resonates. This idea that, like, this is sort of make believe. I mean, like, this is what we do and how we exist and how we pay our bills, but there's also a make believedness to it. Like the relationships are real, how we treat each other are real, but like filing into buildings and like the kind of is sort of I think about like see it as the game it is. So let's be honest with ourselves about work and what we're doing, and then how do we make it the best that it can possibly be. So I think when you say dream job, it's like, okay, if we're gonna play this, where's the part that I fit in, and how do I? And I think for anybody listening, and you're a great example of how do you figure out your best path that's authentic to you, where you can make a difference in the world via this work, because we spend a lot of time with it. It's funny too. You said, "Well, I needed to go find something that would fit." I judge that you push boundaries so much you almost created. I mean, I know Maps was there, but just like it's amazing. And you were one of the first voices I saw. I mean, I remember early on your posts and like the psychedelics. And I told you before we got started, I've always seen you as a pretty unique type of DEI practitioner. I think it's neat, and I think it ties into this idea for anybody listening about forging their own path, whatever it may be, about getting clear on purpose and the why. And I just think how you decided to start this journey is a really cool story.
Yeah, thanks. I used to lie about it. People used to tell me like, "Oh, how did you get into DEI?" And everyone has their story, right? It's like, "Oh, I was, researching," or this. I don't know. People had their stories, and I told fake stories. I wasn't comfortable at first sharing the reality and the truth of how I found this work. But it had always been, I guess, part of something that I cared about. Like if you look at my family, we're all social justice advocates, but I had a very cushy job doing people analytics at Facebook and at Square and in various tech companies. But I cared a lot about DEI. I just didn't know that it was a job or could be a job, or that I would leave my, career with technical skills to do it. But I was at a music festival, my favorite one, Electric Daisy Carnival. And I was just in the crowd. I was on a few psychedelics in that moment. I think it was an LSD MDMA combination. And I just had this powerful feeling of belonging and inclusion, like the deepest sense of love and belonging that I'd been craving my whole life. And of course, yeah, it was a psychedelic assisted emotion, but it was so pure and clean that something sparked in me. And when I got back home, I integrated that experience. Like, what did that mean? Like I almost can't go back to spreadsheets. Like I have to follow that feeling, and the world should feel like that, and workplaces should feel like that, that moment. And it's a dream, but I just felt like what the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement was pushing for, and this is in the backdrop of Black Lives Matter. This is 2015. Trump was running for office. I just felt called to make DEI my next kind of career path. And I've also been one to kind of jump into things towards the right direction. I don't need to have a fully fleshed blueprint or roadmap. I feel comfortable and have enough privilege to kind of jump into spaces like that. I've done that a few times in my career.
It's just so cool. And it's just a reminder. I mean, there are different ways, and I don't want to minimize all of the different reasons people get into this work, and a lot of them are really intense and it deserved to be. But just to sometimes, I think, especially with really heavy topics, to show all sides that you found your way there through this deep sense of connection. It really, even in that moment, wasn't about social justice. It was simply about we can do better, we can connect. And you and I I've always enjoyed. We're both such music lovers, but we have such different music worlds.
Yeah.
You ever heard of this band? You're like, no. You're like, what about this DJ? I'm like, no. But we both go to a lot of music, and I remember in our early conversations, just that I think I didn't see it the same. We didn't pull me in the same way, but just the sense of connection. And I often have that experience at concerts when I look around. It's like, I don't know their politics. I don't know what's going on, but I just know everybody's here right now, connected, feeling, and would probably take care of each other if need be. It's possible.
If you ask, do a survey, says take 100 DEI professionals and ask them how they got into this work, I would guess, I don't know, maybe 80 or 90% would have a story of oppression, marginalization, intersectional bias that they faced. And they're like, I don't want that for my children or for my community or this next generation. And that's important to have that activist social change drive. I just came at it from a different angle of like joy. Like, I want to bring joy to the workplace. And to me, DEI, when you have a culture that really sings, we've been there, we've had it, you've had a taste, and how good it can be. Maybe you didn't have it in your culture, but maybe you probably at some point in your career been on a team where everyone was vibing and it was a diverse and an inclusive team that was working together. Like, that belonging and joy is like what is kind of how
you said, some people, the activists, I will say that just because you have the spirit that you have in the approach, I mean, if anything, I'd call you a joyful activist. You are, I mean, I am not ready to pull that from you, because you've been such a activist in your own way, a provocateur, so you've even pushed me at moments. So I see you as like this beautiful, wonderful activist that just operates in just a different type of way.
Yeah.
And that's good. Not everybody, our activism has to look different ways, right?
Yeah. Adrienne Marie Brown, Pleasure Activism. Have you read that one?
No.
It's good. The premise, I read it a few years ago, but from what I recall, the premise is like, in a society that oppresses like Black bodies, you can extend that to people of color. Pleasure is a form of activism in a society that tells us that we're not supposed to experience that.
I think a lot, when we built the Culture First community, we had this term people geeks for a long time. That was kind of this moniker, but as we were rethinking community, we started testing that. So is that the right term? Is it not? And a couple of things we learned. One is, if it is, there has to be more, because I was on a call with a gentleman from Egypt, asking him what he thought of the word people geek, and we spent most of the call just trying to break down the word geek. So then you're like, well, this can't work globally if the word doesn't even. Regardless, it is a great, for people that are really into the data and the analytics, but we thought it was much broader. And one of the additional terms we came up with was culture first activist. And in the beginning, there was, pushback before it was adopted. And I think, and it was the first time in my life I'd used that word, but I just kept going back to activist. What's the core of that word? Action. An activist is somebody that takes action. And where did that become? There's like a bad, sometimes when you say it, there's almost like a subtle, like, ooh, activist. And I think just maybe breaking it down and saying, how about just being somebody that's willing to take action, like get out of all the stuff and all what it means, and different people are activists in different way. I think if we have a world of people that are focused on something, like you said, you got clear and then you decided to take action towards that thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah. I feel like activism also, at least in the way that I use it, it's like you're taking action to change the status quo. Like the status quo isn't working for you or for your community or just for everyone. And so you take action to just like, let's challenge that.
Can it be different?
Yeah.
I think I had a similar experience when you tell the story about the music festival, and this is fine. This is so like Bay Area of us, this conversation, because of course I'm going to say I've went one time, and I don't know, I don't need to minimize it, but I will say I'm not a burner. I wouldn't call myself that, but I did go to Burning Man one time.
Me too. One time.
Say it sort of in a different way, sort of a similar experience of when you witness something or see something in a new way and you kind of can't turn it around. When I saw 70,000 people that were loosely joined by 10 values and what came to be, and then what just disappeared, poof. It was hard to come back and just say, oh, it just is what it is. And you just witness the power of like, but change is possible. People, I think we undersell what's possible. Like, who am I? I'm just one person, so that was a big one for me, of witnessing, seeing it, just seeing humans organize in different ways and push back on this idea that, oh, I can't change anything?
You know, maybe one person can't, but you have to believe it. Like you can though, right? Like not every person can make this big change, but like one person can. And one of these individuals can if they start a movement, if they bring people
Famous
along.
saying of like, well, every great kind of change started with one person.
Yeah.
Like one person didn't do it all, but it started with a person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about. I'm interested. I want to hear your take, particularly. I mean, I think I'd ask. We talk about this anyways, but I think we're going through something interesting with DEI right now. I'm so curious to get your take. I feel even you, right? You were consulting for a while. It was like there wasn't the more work than you could have gotten your hands around in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
And I definitely feeling in my conversations being out in the world and talking to people that are practitioners, like there has been a massive shift.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think? What's going on? Is it just the same old, like money dries up, it's not important anymore? Like what? Yeah, like let's talk about the current state of DE&I and what you're thinking and seeing.
You know, after George Floyd's murder, that big influx of energy and resources and just capital was nice to mobilize the movement, and it brought a lot of DEI professionals into the space and elevated a lot of ERG leaders into certain positions, whether they were prepared for that or not. When I was working with Kelly Wagner at Collective in that moment, we had to hire something like, I don't know, 30 consultants to like meet all this demand.
We're talking to you, left Culture Amp, and I was like, I can't even get time with him. He's so busy.
And we were like, do we hire people on contract or do we want to pay people full time? Because are people going to care about this next year? And we had to make a tough decision. Like, we just didn't know. We didn't want to hire a bunch of people and then have to lay them off 6 months later. In a sense, what I'm saying is we knew this was probably going to be temporary. We didn't know how long it was going to last. So we hired everyone on contract through the end of the year. And it gave them a taste for Collective and gave Collective some time to kind of figure out how permanent this was going to be. And then we eventually hired people on full time. The demand was sustained. And then flash forward 2 years, the demand is not there. You can talk to any DEI professional that's still employed. A lot of them have lost their jobs. You can talk to any DEI firm that's still around. Many of them have closed or are just kind of subsisting on 1 or 2 clients now. Demand has really vanished. And some people just say it's a correction because, the influx of demand and resources and capital would never be sustained.
What do you say?
Yeah, I think it's a correction. And it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think a lot of programs are going to flux with the economy. And when he comes in, yeah, you're going to have more extravagant holiday parties, and there's going to be more inter-office travel. DEI programs are going to have bigger budgets. And when inflation hits, and this is particularly true in tech, where we spent a lot of time, cuts are made, and we shift to a performance culture where everything is scrutinized.
Yeah. I feel the pullback to performance. I've always struggled with performance because I think it's broken, but it's the reminder, if this is the moment we're in, how do we do it better? How do we do it? I mean, they're all important. And the reality is that I think performance does, if we engage with people like this, if we ask them to do work, if we're reviewing them, rating them, but we have that program in place and do it in a fair way. And the reality is, I think you'd agree that DE&I ultimately sits over all of it. Like if we get into a real conversation about performance, we're ultimately going to get back to bias. We're going to get back to justice. We're going to get back to like these same topics. And I think in my work, that was one of the ahas early on. when I first got to Culture Amp, DEI was its own thing. That was not what I did. I did this culture consulting thing. And very quickly, and you probably heard me say it, like all roads lead to DE&I. I mean, if you're going to do any of this work, ultimately you are part of.
Yeah, in my organization, where the nonprofit side that I'm on is about 40 people. and we're about to implement performance reviews.
Yeah.
And so we're sitting down. I'm one of the core players in this. And the biggest challenge that we're sitting with right now is, what would a psychedelic performance review process look like? How do we bring the ethos of psychedelics into a performance review process? There's two things I've kind of been juggling with right now, and I'd love to get your thoughts on, like,
live.
One of them is this part of the psychedelic experience, for those that are listening that aren't as familiar, is after your psychedelic journey, you don't get all the insights in that journey necessarily. There's an integration period, and sometimes you actually have an integration support coach or guide, and you process, I had this emotion, or I hallucinated this thing, or I had this difficult, challenging experience. There's an integration period. So, like, when you get your feedback, can we create time and space for integration? So it's not like Craig, you only met some expectations this pay period. What do you think? Like, can I just integrate for a moment? Can I just internalize and sit with this? So time for integration is something that we want to build in. And the other thing is, we hate performance improvement plans, PIPs. Like there's two kinds of PIPs.
Nothing says fired like PIP.
There's two kinds of PIPs. There's one PIP that's like, hey, we actually think we can get you back up to performing at the level that we need. Here's the milestones that we want to see. Here's the support we're going to give you. There's a real PIP. And then there's the PIP that's like, we're actually going to fire you in 3 months no matter what. Here's some unrealistic goals for you that you'll never meet.
Yeah, this is a cover our ass kind of thing.
Can we just be honest? Can we just tell people what kind of PIP they're on?
I think as soon as you say PIP, when you said there's two kinds, I'm like, no, there's a conversation that happens that's more gingerly, and then there's the PIP. Because when you say PIP, I don't care what you're doing, everybody goes home and goes, I'm on a PIP. And everybody's like, okay, start
looking, right?
Okay,
so that's just something like the psychedelic ethos is just empathetic and transparent and cares deeply about the person. I hate anything that is shrouded in HR.
I mean, can we start with how unnatural it is when we put people in positions to rate and review and judge others, especially if we can
start there?
I think some of it is just we don't normally do it. We probably didn't like it very much in school. I will say this, and I think this was a very interesting aha for me. Jason Lauritsen, who wrote a book on our performance, he's done a lot of work in the space. I had a conversation with him years back, and he made a good point that always sat with me. He says, and this goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, let's be real about the game we're playing, but can we be human? When I take a job at a company, I sign an employment contract, just as if somebody, you have to do construction in your house, you have a contract. I'm going to pay you X, you're going to do X. This is what we're doing. There have to be moments where we sit down and look at that contract and say, we've agreed, we've entered in this agreement together. How's it going? Should we redo it? Can we add more? Should we increase your pay? I think it's important, but I think we need to hold it in its own very unique box and say, that's what we're doing. That is not your development conversation. That's not how can you grow and what's next and moving forward. It is simply sitting and saying, we are here together at some level because there's a contract in place. And let's be real, let's be honest. And employees and employers, let's just have that conversation now. So you've separated. How can you do that in a more human way? When we're talking about reviewing each other. I love what you just said about integration. And I think, look, I have very limited experience with psychedelics. I mean, a mild bit, but I understand that. But I've also had other powerful, I've gone on weekends or retreats. And I think the same thing holds when you have a very powerful experience, some time to process. And when you said that, I had a visceral reaction because you're right. You sit and wait for the final results to come down. It's just delivered and that's it. And there's no opportunity. Sometimes it's very emotional. And I think about it differently a week after I've given it than when I got the review. So I think that's really powerful. And the other thought I had was around, I think there's a fail spot in the system. And I've watched lots of performance management systems being built and done with, as with thought and attention given to transparency, to minimizing bias. But it seems like all of the ones that I know of that I've seen up to this point, they do all the work. I mean, a well-developed, if you're investing in this, not just running it yourself, of all those tools and things to help with the transparency and all that. And then it comes down to, I think, one of the biggest fail points in the area that we need to be focusing on more is, and then you say, okay, manager, you decide who these reviews are going to go out to. Like, so you do all this work to minimize bias, and you go to one person, a person that has, I mean, like even in the positive way, there's a bias, right? If I like that employee and that employee serves me really well, and I'm getting kudos because of the work that employee does, who might I ask to get reviews versus this employee everybody likes, but I really struggle with, and now it's time for me to decide who that goes out to. And I think we can do better at democratizing and thinking about, how about we get really good, fair information, collect it, and give it back to manager, and then say, now have a conversation. And I have other ideas on this, but I think I want more companies to look at their systems and ask themselves, have we done all this work to get to one fail point, which is the bias of the manager? And which, and Gallup's State of the Global Workforce report just came out, and like its biggest thing was the future is the manager. We have to rethink managers. And I've been thinking a lot about that. I've always struggled with it. And I think it plays an awful role in the performance management process. Thoughts?
For us to keep things simple, what we're thinking of, and by the way, thanks for all this advice. You can send me your invoice afterwards. We just have such a small strapped team. We were thinking, get 2 pieces of feedback from your peers. One person who you think you've worked really well with, and one person who you haven't. And their job is explicitly to give you critical feedback. I just hate this whole, like, we love each other as an organization. It's like, I don't want to mess up your chance of getting a promotion. I don't want to mess with your livelihood. So everyone kind of like knowing that my performance review of you might impact, if you get a promotion or not, or like, I have a really hard time giving critical feedback in a performance review process. I find it easier to give people critical feedback just in a conversation. But we thought if there's a role, positive feedback and critical feedback, and this person's job is just to give you critical feedback, that it gives a balanced view for the manager.
I like where you're going with that.
Yeah.
I think asking an employee to go do that is really well, it's good intention, but we know that, like, we know human bias. Also, you painted out like, I don't want to give you, I don't want to do that. But the flip side is, I'd ask anybody to say, how many people have been on a team where someone's not pulling their weight, no one's willing to say anything, and you're working extra. Like, we're running organizations here, people. Can we be honest with like what our objective is, what our goal is? We are working together. And I struggle because I think too many people make organizations aren't super efficient because people aren't willing to do that. So what I say is, then how might we create a system that allows that? I've been thinking a lot about this. Here's what I would do. I would use organizational network analysis to just, and I don't think it's that complicated anymore, to look at who's working with who. And I think you could just send out one question, and I'm still working out what that would be. This is where you could come in, but something of just like, I would recommend working with that, or, this, just not trying to dig up dirt or anything, and just get a simple, this is somebody that, I think supports my work, or I would recommend working with this person. And for everybody that you work closely with, doesn't mean it's your manager, it could be the procurement person. And then what I would do is I would use those scores to identify who to send out. So if there's a range, I would want to hear from people that struggle, people that maybe are neutral, and people that are positive, and then present that back to a manager and say, now we did it. Just, we looked across, because if everybody, in the end of the day, if it goes up to 6 people and 4 of them say, I would not recommend working with this person ever. And the one manager who, a very hierarchical system, loves that person because that person's giving them what they want. Don't you want to know about that? I mean, in the end of the day, just because you're good, if people don't like working with you, like, isn't that fundamentally like a core part? Like, people that are competent, work well with each other, are going to drive a great business. So I would just want to take the humans out of it and just get a fair assessment across the board, and then make sure that we're getting a nice subset of reviews to come back.
Oh, well, we're still rating people. What if the one Black woman on the group rubs the 6 white men the wrong way?
Yeah. And that's
no. I feel like I got to bring you in to my organization, because we are a funky bunch. Like, drug policy reformers. And
well, okay, so you're on the bleeding edge. Tell me about some other, like, what would you look? You've always been pretty thoughtful and a thought leader in the space. So I think as we're turning the corner here, Just for anybody that is doing this work in their organizations, like we got pretty deep into performance and DE&I, but just what are some high level like learnings or ahas or things you think are important for anybody thinking about this kind of work, or how they can be somebody in their organization helping move the needle, particularly when we're pulling back our resources on the DEI professionals? Just any thoughts?
I'm such in this like fringe culture right now. Like, I don't know if you want to get advice from me. Our employee handbook says you can be high at work. So
Okay.
we're often high at work. Not often. We have certain things we deem as smokable tasks. I like to do more creative work when I'm stoned.
Great. I love that. Like, great. Like this
Some people like to do more manual, tasks when they're stoned. Some people don't like smoking work at all. I can't smoke in the morning and then be productive in the afternoon. So I do my smokable tasks in the afternoon. But I think what's interesting about the way that we work in a psychedelic culture is we just challenge how to do things. There's a tried and true method, and not that we always throw it out, but we'll question it. Like, hey, is that going to work for us? I don't know. Let's all try some ketamine and like think about this in a hot tub. Is like the mentality, and we'll think about it and we're like, yeah, that process does work. Or like, actually, no, maybe we want to create a new kind of special financing vehicle for this thing that we're trying to fund. How would we do that? I'm like, I don't know. It's like, get this person.
How might we, right? You go and you use whatever. You're open, your culture's open, you call it out, you're open to, to psychedelics and drugs. So but regardless, it's a how might we, you just will do that using substance. At the same time, it's the same, like question it versus just the way it is.
Yeah. And I think that's important. There's always, if you go to any conference, right, there's always someone telling you like, this is the way you do it. And then if you look back 10 or 20 years, it was the opposite, ratings, no ratings, ratings, no ratings, we're just like cycling back and forth and back and forth. So it's not to say that we have all the answers. And oftentimes we do have to rely on like, there's this pushback for us using OKRs. And like, okay, well, how do you want to set goals and hold yourself accountable and like know what you're being evaluated against? And eventually we decided, okay, yeah, we do like OKRs. But there was this period where there was
being honest on both sides. We're running an organization. If the organization doesn't succeed, like we're trying to get a whole bunch of human bodies together to do this thing in the world. If it doesn't succeed, it goes away. Like this goes back to performance review, the OKRs. Like, can we be honest and say, okay, this is part of it, not tie it all together, tease out like, and we're going to take care of people and we're going to have certain standards and how do we show up in the world? But I think to your point, you got back to it because at the end of the day, how can 100 people, 200 people, 300 people, even more get aligned and achieve something without some sort of, through time and space, this has been the case. We need some vision, some unifying force to help move us collectively in a direction.
Yeah, especially we're a remote workforce. So
AI, DE&I, it's big. I mean, it's everywhere. You can't get away. It's what are you thinking about?
I like using AI for certain things. Yeah. For me, I use it to help at least draft up, right? I always edit and go through. I never take it for granted. But to respond in a trauma-informed way, at MAPS, we work with a lot of people that are experiencing trauma, have experienced trauma. And so requests will come in and I'm like, start typing and I'm like, this isn't right. This person is going through a mental health challenge. I will kind of like ask for how I respond to something in a trauma-informed way in AI, in whatever tool you want to use, and it pops something out. I'm like, oh, that like the tone. Ironically, it uses this really amazing human soft, like therapist-driven tone that I'm not a trained therapist. I'm like, I'm using the machine to sound more human. Like, oh, geez. But that's
great. I think that's cool for people to hear you talk about a practical use case. And
there's tons.
Day to day, it's helping. And I imagine that we pull back big lens. You probably have some like concerns about what this means.
Oh, tons.
People, who's informing these models and all that. But
there are amazing people working on that. And I'm like, you go, algorithmic justice league, and you figure that out. And in the
It's
meantime,
like
I'm going to use
internet.
it for me,
Sometimes you have to say it's here. So what side are you going to be on? Are you going to sit back, or are you going to help make sure it's as just as possible and do it the right way? Because it's not turning around. So let's all get actively involved to make sure we can use this in a healthy and productive way.
Yeah. I mean, it's also early days, so it is the time to influence. And I think you saw my LinkedIn post. I asked it to write my obituary. I don't recommend that.
Oh, I didn't see that.
It got everything right. It was like got my career, and like, I've written a lot online.
You did, or did it went and found all that stuff about you on its own?
Found all this stuff about me on my own, but it did say that I died unexpectedly at 47. And I left behind a wife and 2 kids. So I'm a lot can happen in 11 years. I'm like, oh no, oh.
Didn't do all of its research, did it?
Well, yeah, stranger things can happen.
I guess that's true. I'm not gonna rule anything out.
And then apparently my wife or someone said that instead of in lieu of flowers, that you could donate to maps. And I was like,
He left behind a beautiful collection of fine clothing and amazing. No, that's I didn't know you did that. I'm gonna have to go look. See, this is what I'm talking about. This is everybody.
Just be careful. I mean, it's like 47, like that's very soon. Like, why didn't it say I lived this long, beautiful life?
That is strange. Maybe just because you said write an obituary, so it went and looked at obituaries and had to come up with some reason why you died.
Do most people die unexpectedly at 47?
In the training.
I don't know. I like when I turn 47, I'm gonna be so careful.
Because you asked AI. Oh goodness. Well, I said we're going to do this in 30 minutes, and that's what we're going to do. Here's my whole take on this podcast is that they're conversations, which mean they can go on. I think that I will be talking to you often, especially as times change and looking at new things, because I always really like to look at current events with you. And I just appreciate you taking the time. Like I said in the opening, you're somebody that's very important to me on many levels. You've been a real important part in my journey, and I'm just really grateful that you're in the world doing this work, and that you're somebody I can call on when I need.
Thanks. I will make a plug for just an idea that I've been playing around with. If anyone on the podcast is curious about kind of exploring this, so many people are in career transition right now. Either they've been laid off, or they've been in tech long enough and they think, hey, maybe there's something else out there for me. And you can apply that to any industry. I really want to think about what psychedelic assisted career exploration could look like. And I'm just thinking from my own experience, I've explored careers and made pivots for better or worse while integrating a psychedelic experience. So I'm trying to think about what that might look like for others.
I think based on what I know about psychedelics and my own, experience with them, but also my own journey, because I think there are different paths to get some of these kinds of, and this about me, that the work I did prior to getting the cold trip and my own journey and my own struggles was getting clear on my purpose. I'll work better by improving the places we work, and everything shifted in my career afterwards. And I often talk to, if there's a younger person in their career, I'll say that, and that's okay if you're in your 20s, let that be the work. Like, not everybody has their purpose nailed out. Let that. My assumption is that with facilitated and with the right intention, that psychedelics can help people more quickly get to that kind of clarity, so they can move from purpose and not trying to prove something I spent so long trying to prove something to others. Finally just started moving from purpose and I didn't have to be a manager. I didn't have to be this or that. I just got to every day say, am I moving towards that? Am I going bigger? Things happened in my career that I think never would have happened otherwise. So my hope is maybe anything that can support people to get more quickly to that idea of what are you here to do when it's all said and done? What do you want to say was the mark you made, and get on it?
Yeah. It wouldn't be for everyone, but I think it might work for some people.
Absolutely.
Career clarity.
And why can't it be an option?
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, in today's day and age, like let that be an option. We're trying to, also the health, well-being, which we didn't get into, and why can't we put more things on the table as far as opportunities for people to be better? So more conversation.
I know we can keep going.
So thank you so much for being here with me. And just anybody check out, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Is I imagine LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn, Stephen Huang, HU.
But reach out. If you do reach out because of this podcast, send a note with it and say this is where you heard the conversation. So Sven knows where it's coming from and there's some connection there. So, all right. Anything else? Any other things you want to say about yourself or your work for people to know before we close this out?
I get a lot of pings on LinkedIn privately about people that have been using psychedelics in their lives and the role that it's played in their lives. And I love getting those messages. So yeah, if there's something that you want to share, you haven't felt like there's been a person to share it with, I'm here for you.